Hi, I'm Sean, an interpreter at the Missouri Botanical Garden.
And I'm Em. I am also an interpreter at the Missouri Botanical Garden. During today's segment of Dig In, we're going to be digging deeper into the history of coffee and tea. Since the dawn of time, people have turned to plants for food, sometimes consumed as solids, and sometimes turned into beverages for consumption. And when dawn comes, people today continue to turn to beverages derived from plants, like juice, teas, coffees, to get them going in the morning. Everyone has their preferred morning beverage.
Mine happens to be coffee. I'm enjoying its rich flavor right now. By the way, Em, did you know that coffee has a rich history as well as a rich flavor?
You know, Sean, I never really thought about where we get coffee aside from the shop with the siren logo. Tell me more.
You're not alone in that thinking, Em, but coffee is actually a historically and culturally important plant. Coffea arabica, as we know it, originated in coastal Ethiopia. Legend has it that a goat herder named Caldi let his goats pasture where coffee plants grew. He noticed that his goats became full of energy after eating the berries from the plants and didn't sleep at night. Caldi shared this information with his local abbot, who then harvested the berries to use himself as a stimulating drink to stay awake during evening prayers.
Caldi, now that name sounds familiar. You said that was a legend, right? What do we know for a fact about coffee historically?
Well, we do know that coffee originated in Ethiopia and that it was originally used for religious purposes to help those who were fasting or for staying awake for evening prayers. And we do know that it became an extremely popular drink. From Ethiopia, coffee cultivation spread to the Arabian Peninsula, and it is there that the coffee trade really began. By the 15th century, coffee was being grown in Yemen, and by the 16th century, it was an established drink in Persia, Egypt, Syria, and Turkey. It was being drunk in homes and public venues for enjoyment as well as being used for religious purposes. In fact, that's when coffee houses, like the one with the siren logo that you mentioned, first appeared. And thanks to the thousands of pilgrims from all over the world who visited the holy city of Mecca each year, interest in coffee began to spread outside of the Near East. Coffee became an in-demand commodity as European travelers to the Near East brought word of it back to Europe. It even got papal approval from Clement VIII. With such an endorsement, coffee had a stronghold in Europe and began to replace the common breakfast beverages of the time. Beer and wine. It was kind of dangerous drinking the water back then. Drinking coffee instead of alcohol helped people to be alert and energized for work. It even was prescribed to help people medicinally to soothe their stomachs and increase brain acuity.
I know caffeine definitely helps me wake up in the morning.
As it does billions of others, if you look at our current coffee establishments. Everywhere coffee was drunk, coffee houses sprang up. They were extremely popular social gathering spots where patrons drank coffee, conversed, listened to music, played games, and learned the current news. You know, what's the buzz? Coffee houses were the gathering places for the exchange of information.
Kind of like how people gather in coffee shops today for business meetings and the like.
Exactly. Well, eventually coffee was brought to the Americas. I'll drink to that. The English brought it to North America, while the French brought coffee to South America and the West Indies in 1723, where they established coffee plantations. The downside is that by the 1800s, rainforests were being cleared for these plantations. And because harvesting coffee is labor intensive, it led to enslavement of South American natives. Well, South America eventually became the main global source of coffee, and it remains so today.
Wow, Sean, I had no idea coffee had such a long and intricate history. But now that I think about it, did you know tea does as well?
Oh, do tell, Em.
Tea has been cultivated for so long, botanists aren't even sure of its original native range. Currently, the consensus is that the tea plant, Camellia sinensis, originated along the border of China and Nepal near the Himalayan mountains. Tea has been used in Asia for so long, dating the first use of it is close to impossible. Some anthropologists, people who study people, even believe prehistoric humans like Homo erectus were the first to brew tea.
That's amazing. I know that the process of making coffee hasn't changed over time. Has the process of making tea changed a lot since then?
Good question. As far back as about 1500 BCE, the people of China were plucking the leaves, boiling them over a hot fire, and then letting them dry out. That process is now what we know as green tea.
I've heard of the different types of tea. If that is green tea, what is black tea?
Well, as we all know, eventually European explorers made it to Asia. One of the things they saw people drinking was tea, and of course they took an interest in it. But there was one major problem.
And what was that?
When the Europeans tried to ship tea back home, the stock molded and went bad before it arrived, much less before it could be consumed. So a new process had to be devised in order for the tea to get to Europe before molding. Black tea wasn't a preference for the Europeans, it was all they could get.
Now, that must be why you didn't see a lot of English people drinking green tea. Oh, and thus clipper ships were created.
Right. It wasn't even the English to first drink tea, even though everyone thinks of England when they think of black tea. The Dutch actually were the first to drink it in Europe and introduced it to the English. Tea was also the preferred beverage of the colonists in America until, well, the
The
Boston Tea
Boston Tea
Party.
Party in 1773.
Right. The United Kingdom only allowed tea from the East India Company to be sold in the colonies. But because Parliament continued to tax the colonies without giving them any representation in Parliament, the colonists threw all of the tea in Boston Harbor in protest. Not only was it a very dramatic event leading to the Revolutionary War, but tea consumption actually decreased significantly after the protest. Can you guess what took its place?
Ah, my good old patriotic friend coffee. Drinking coffee to boycott tea wasn't the first time coffee had had a significant economic and cultural impact in the Americas. When first introduced to the New World, coffee and tea replaced a caffeinated drink referred to as cassina, made from the only native North American plant known to contain caffeine, yopon, or Ilex vomitoria. Cassina was used by Native Americans as a ceremonial drink. The dried leaves and stems of yopon was an important trade item among Native American tribes. Once introduced, both Spanish and English colonists drank yopon tea. It was even exported to England, but it never caught on. It couldn't compete with imported tea and coffee. Maybe its unappealing scientific name had something to do with that.
You know, there was another drink that coffee and tea replaced, though this one was in South America. It's actually a close relative to Yopon called Yerba mate or Ilex paraguayensis. In its native range of southern Brazil and Paraguay, the indigenous Guarani people have the longest history of drinking mate. It's actually incorporated into their belief of the creation of the world. An old man once saved the two twin goddesses from a jaguar, and in return, the mother of the heavens gave humanity a medicinal plant, or the yerba mate. The Guarani people introduced it to the Spanish, who became so enthralled with it that the king tried to step in and ban it, but he failed. Mate is still very popular in South America as well as Spain, but the growing conditions needed to grow yerba mate make it harder to cultivate on the same scale as coffee or tea. A lot of its pests are hard to control, and the plant does not grow well outside of its native range. Therefore, coffee and tea still dominate the market for caffeinated beverages.
Believe it or not, Demand for coffee on the global market today is second only to that of crude oil. Currently, the top 3 producers of coffee are Brazil, Vietnam, and Colombia. The establishment of fair trade practices has been incorporated to support indigenous people involved in the commercial growing and selling of coffee.
Fair trade practices help producers in developing countries establish sustainable and equitable trade relationships and address the inequitable wealth distribution established in prior centuries by the creation of large corporations and monopolies such as the East India Company.
Besides addressing the economic impact of coffee, there has also been a push to lessen the environmental impact through the introduction of sustainable growing practices. Growing non-native plants such as Coffea arabica in South America is much more difficult and destructive than growing native ones such as Yaupon or Yerba mate. To abate the deforestation in South America, shade-grown coffee varietals have been introduced.
Like coffee, the widespread growing of tea in non-native areas has decreased the biodiversity of those areas. Additionally, individually wrapped tea bags are often non-recyclable and non-compostable, leading to more waste in landfills. It's okay to have a cup of tea, but consider using loose leaf tea or supporting companies that use compostable or biodegradable tea bags in packaging.
So, what happened to the native caffeinated drinks we've never heard of before? Yaupon still grows naturally in its original range and is grown and harvested commercially. Yaupon is currently being sold on the internet, and stories about its history and benefits can be found online.
Yerba mate is also still available online. It is mostly grown in its native range of southern Brazil and Paraguay. It is popularly consumed these days in the form of a fizzy energy drink or an iced tea. So for some of its consumers, it may be more of an afternoon pickup rather than a morning boost. So if you're curious for a taste, get your hands on some Yaupon or Yerba mate online or in-store. For more information about the coffee plant or the ilex family, which Yerba mate and Yaupon both come from, check out the garden's blog Discover and Share for those plant profiles. We'll include the links below. What other plants do we consume regularly? Are you curious about the history of other plants we consume? Let us know in the comments, and thank you for tuning in to today's Dig In.